painting goggles. Not that I need them to see with, but just it helps my creative energies come into my head better. So anyway, I'm doing basically what I call it the Tsenacommacah, which is the real name for the people that we call Powhatan Native Americans, or properly pronounced Powhatans. And this painting is 69 inches by 103 inches. That's roughly about 6 by 8.5. This painting here is in oil. And basically what I'm doing now is I kind of got all of my geometry into the painting. I have my, my shapes. I have the dynamic of the topic down. So now I have my main subjects. I have Tsenacommacah. He is Wahankanoka's brother. Wahankanoka is the person we call Chief Powhatan, but his actual name is Mama Matoaka. That's actually the title that he had, that basically is the king of all of the kings, the Powhatans. Each tribe was a nation, and there was 31 nations in his confederacy, and he was basically like, or a state, like we have 50 states in the United States. Each tribe was like a state. Each state had a warrants, basically was the king of that particular tribe or that particular nation, and he was basically the paramount king of all of those nations altogether, which is called a Mama Matoaka in their language, which is Algonquian language, which basically Algonquian language is all over the place from Canada, along the East Coast, all the way down to the Mediterranean area, but mostly, not the Mediterranean, the mid-Atlantic area, mostly is in the mid-Atlantic area. There's other languages peppered out throughout, but some of these tribes are interrelated or have some relationships. Some have different languages, but very similar cultures, etc. So I'm concentrating on the ones of basically primarily stationed in the Tidewater area of Virginia, was their primary station. But they basically encompassed the whole state of Virginia, including portions of North Carolina all the way up to Delaware. So they would call it the Tsenacommacah Native Americans, commonly known as Powhatan, but properly pronounced Powhatan. Basically, Powhatan was Wahansenoka's tribe, actually. And so that was a location near the James River, because what we call the James River in Richmond, Virginia, was really the Powhatan River. So you're at Powhatan. Of course, the holy area was Powhatan, which is the Bon Air area, just on a slightly western portion of Virginia, going towards the west in Richmond. I believe on the north and the south side of the James River, that was Powhatan. And of course, Powhatan is you're right at, or you're overlooking Powhatan. And of course, the Powhatan River as well, when the river changes from a navigable river where actual ship can navigate to kind of like rapids, with stones in it, things like that. You can't really use a big boat on that. You only can use a canoe or a raft or something like that to navigate those waters. So that's where his Wahansenoka's headquarters was. It was basically at the area we call Chimborazo Park in Churchill, Virginia. As a matter of fact, the area that we call Churchill, Virginia in Richmond was used to be called Powhatan Hill. I don't know actually the name of hill in the Algonquian language that they spoke. However, but it was called Powhatan Hill, and it got changed to Church Hill because Pow means place, height means divine. So it was a divine place. So naturally, the natives had a divine place. So when the English colonials came, that was paganism. So they had to basically put a church right on top of the spot. Was the main location for the Powhatans. And of course, that was just the most holy spot for the Powhatan nation, which was Wahansenoka's nation. He was the paramount king, which is called the Mama Matoaka. Now, you also have his brother, his main tribe was the Pamunkey tribe. Just, the York River splits into two different tributaries, the Mattaponi to the north and the Pamunkey to the south. And the Pamunkey lived along the Pamunkey River. Tsenacommacah was either his full brother or half brother. He was one of Wahansenoka's main guys. As a matter of fact, he became the Mama Matoaka after Wahansenoka died in 1618, and then Tsenacommacah took over from 1618 until when he died in 1649. So that's just a little back history. just as I introduce myself, and I like to wave back to people. Gordy Teller, how you doing? Waving back at you. Good to see you. So basically, I just like to give a little back history, as I paint. So what I'm doing today, usually I would have my palette out ahead of time, but what I didn't do is I didn't get my palette out ahead of time. I did get my brushes out ahead of time, but it just doesn't take that much work for me to get my palette out. And basically, I've been working on this this is my 12th day, and I've basically been working about 4 hours a day on this. So basically, if you haven't been able to, if you want to know some back history or some other things, because I've been, I hate to be repetitive and repeating things, and sometimes I do because I don't know if people have seen my other. I'm doing this is an episodal, basically I decided it'd be a cool idea instead of just me being in quarantine in my studio by myself that I can actually share my painting sessions using social media. So I'm in Facebook. And also by doing so, to be able to just have some kind of dialogue, maybe just talk about my thoughts as why I choose certain topics or certain dynamics, in my content. I'm a type of painter, I like to paint both content and, image. It's about image and it's also about content. Some people, and I have abstract elements in my paintings, as you can see, the way I use color, the way I use shape, the way I use form. So I do have abstract elements in my painting. However, I like to paint figuratively. Now, not necessarily photorealistically, but at times I do go photorealistically. You can see Barack Obama and various other ones that basically photorealistic. You see some of my Africa paintings on the wall behind there. Sometimes I get a little bit more, get really heavy with my impasto, my texture. I put the paint on very, very thick, very, very heavy, very, very liberally, because I like it. It looks good. The paintings, what I have what I call swag. They smoke, they look good on the wall. They look like you have some quality fine art painting on your wall. You don't just have some printout. You don't have some photographically or digitally rendered something that you would buy from the superstore or department store somewhere. You actually have something that's handcrafted by a degreed fine artist like myself, who spent some time with it. And I think that's another one of the reasons that I really like to go live with these, because then if you was to purchase one of my paintings, or if you was to see one of my paintings in a gallery, art gallery, or museum somewhere, you would know what I did, what I put into it to make these paintings. So you know the amount of work that actually goes into it. So that's another element there. And however, I do, this painting is about the abduction of Matoaka. Now, Matoaka is the person that we also call Pocahontas. Her real name was Anyuete Matoaka. Now, her common name was Amenueti, and her divine name, or her royal name, was Matoaka. And Matoaka, it means that she was a very special person. She was destined to be the mother of all the next kings, or perhaps the mother of next kings. It was a special name, and she was a very special person to her father, because that was she was born from the lady who made him a king, because the Tsenacommacah Powhatans, they had a matriarchic system. I mean, basically, most of the natives in the Americas had a matriarchic system. In other words, the king came through the queen. It was the only way they could guarantee that the bloodline was, in fact, the actual ancient bloodline. They had to see the baby come out of the womb. So what happened was, you had a king and a queen, and they would make a baby, and then that baby would come out, and then they would know that that's their baby. So then when the next king came about, there was no monkey business going on with the next fellow, because, there was always the daughter. It wasn't like the son, and then the other woman could deal with somebody else, or, and the bloodline is getting all shifted around. So the bloodline went out of the women, and what they would do is they would select the smartest, bravest, strongest person in that tribe who would get to be the king. And that's kind of how that happened. And basically, the government was a council, what they call the Council of Women. I don't know exactly how to describe that, but basically it was the Wezawarrant Squaw. That's one of the words that you would use to describe them. Not everybody was a Wezawarrant Squaw. There was one person who was the premier lady in the tribe. You had a Wezawarrant, that was her husband. He was the king of that particular tribe or nation. But again, you had somebody like Powhatan Tsenacommacah or Chief Powhatan, they call him chief, but really it was more like emperor. Even Captain John Smith himself, in his journals, called Powhatan Tsenacommacah emperor, because he realized, especially when basically what Captain John Smith was a mercenary, and what he did was he went out and to find out exactly how many people is in this new land here, because he wanted to conquer them. I mean, let's be realistic about it. He wanted to just simply come in and take the land through conquest, just like Cortez. That's what he wanted to do. He didn't want to come in and be nice or anything like that. Now later on, when you get to places like William Penn up in Pennsylvania, they already had a playbook. Captain John Smith had already made a playbook in terms of Englishmen, what to do with the natives when you get here, how to trade with them to trick them out of land, and et cetera, and et cetera. So yes, they were able to bring ingots and trinkets and treasures and trade with the natives to be able to squat on the land. And then of course, what they would do is just simply take the land, and natives didn't quite understand that. And that always made a problem. It always created a little bit of a bad scenario between the natives and the colonials. Okay, so that's going on. Of course, anybody who comes to my room, I'm going to wave back because I really like doing that. Wood Fox, what's up? How you doing? How you doing? Basically, well, let me just go a little quick pan. I don't know if you guys can see everything. Okay, over here I have my painting. This is an oil painting, 69 inches by 103 inches. This is called Kemetu Kingdom, or Ancient Egypt. That is the king and the queen, or Haru and Haru. And this one in the middle that I'm working on now is called the Abduction of Matoaka, 1613. And then behind that, that's Barack Obama. And then just in front of that, that is Tupac Shakur and Nipsey Hussle, the Revolution. And then over here, I have Ra on the throne, and you can see here's an hourglass, and there's some wine in a goblet. He's sitting on the earth thinking, kind of like the thinking man. So all these are oil paintings. Of course, back behind there, I have even more paintings. So this is my studio. This is what I have going on. Let me make a little, I think that's about adjusted as about the best I can get. Okay, so, and what I'm going to be doing is painting. So today, I'm going to be teaching, but I'm also be painting. Sometimes I think here lately I've been talking about the story so much, I might have been neglecting my painting. So I'm also from time to time start talking about, talk about, what I'm doing with the painting, because right now I'm really trying to darken the shadows, make those recede into the background, and at the same time pop the foreground, And of course, I'm always thinking about my impasto, my texture, my brush strokes. I don't just like the flat rendering, of the painting, trying to get it as realistic as possible. You don't see any brush strokes. I'm more or less into the philosophy of Rembrandt. I kind of like a little bit of some gesturalness in my painting. Yes, I do like the figurative, realistic look, but I also like the tactileness sometimes of the paints. That's what differentiates a painting. It differentiates a painting from a photograph or from something digital that you would have output, to a substrate. This is on canvas. I also paint on linen as well. I put about 6 or 7 coats of primer on just to make sure it's well crafted. So these are very, very well crafted canvases designed to last a very long time. Okay, so I do have some mock-ups that I've done, so I'm going to be looking at those. But for the most part, I kind of have this kind of laid out exactly where I want it, and I like the way this is going. A lot of times I do need to be able to look at my painting objectively, you know, from from not so close up, you know, not so like right up, you know, on it, not so okay, this is my painting. No, you're not so precious about it, you know. I like to have my painting so that I can kind of be a little bit objective, but at the same time, just look at to see what, you know, the painting tells me what parts I want to paint first, second, third, what needs to be dealt with, and that's what I would deal with. And I just update that or fix that, then the painting will call me to another area, and then I'll work on that, you know. So that's kind of like my workflow. That's the way I work with my painting. So, of course, if anybody have a question, like to say anything, ask me, just leave a comment, and I'll be checking from time to time. Joey, what's up? Joey Cruz, how you doing? KRS. Okay, what's up, man? So anyway, all right, so there we go. So basically I am in painting mode now. It's painting time. And so that's what I shall be doing. So I have my palette all laid out, really nice. And I'm going to go in first with some Dioxide purple. And I'm just going to put a little bit of ultramarine brute. And I'm going to kind of go into one of these conquistadors, one of the colonizers that's defending the Jamestown. This is the Jamestown Fort, by the way, which is located in the Tidewater area of Virginia as you're going towards Norfolk. And so if you was to come up the I-95, for example, which is a very popular interstate on the East Coast, and you got to I-64 right here at Richmond, you would keep that all the way to east to the ocean. And as you're going to the ocean, you'll see a place called Colonial Williamsburg. And you'll also see a little sign that might say Jamestown. But they have like a special amusement area that's basically set up for historic purposes, where they reenact some of the colonial things. They really built forts, and they built the little ships that some of the English came in on. And hopefully they'll have more Native Americans, because those are the people who were here first. Those are the people who inhabited the area. And so why do we want to start our history with Jamestown when there is history of Americans before? I mean, they weren't called Americans, they were called the Tsenacommacahs, but before Jamestown. So that's one of the reasons I'm painting this painting, is so that I can commemorate those people, you know, because there's just not enough thought given to them. And it's their past too, and we still have some various tribes left. For example, my grandfather was from the Mattaponi tribe, which makes me Mattaponi, because my grandfather was, and I claim Mattaponi. So basically, so there's plenty of people still in the region who are descendants of these groups. So there's absolutely no reason that we shouldn't be celebrating them as well, you know, in terms of our historic memories and making parks of the past. The Tsenacommacah Powhatans. And they, again, Powhatan is with the colonizers mistook a lot of things, you know. And so it's very clear, it's very easy to understand how they didn't get along too well. Because even today, there is a lot of misunderstandings that still prevail today about the original natives of Virginia, who were really called the Tsenacommacahs. They were not called the Powhatans. The Powhatans was Richmond. If you go to the Richmond area, that tribe is basically the city of Richmond, which is currently renamed to the city of Richmond. Okay, the city of Richmond used to be called Powhatan. But the natives that was greeted by John Smith, they were the Pamunkey. They were the Mattaponi natives. They were the Chickahominy. They were the Nansemons. They were different other groups that was part of Confederacy. And the capital was Powhatan. That was the capital city, was Powhatan. And guess what? The capital city of Richmond today is Richmond, Virginia. The capital city of the state of Virginia is actually Richmond. So it's ironic there's so many things that parallel the original nation. But if you don't really know that it was original nation, the nation wasn't just called Powhatan. You know, if you go look at a map of Native Americans, you'll see Powhatan. You'll never see Tsenacommacah. And again, that's not what they would call a sub-tribe of the Tsenacommacah or a sub-nation or state in the Tsenacommacah Confederacy that happened to be the capital. Well, that wasn't the capital. It was where the current king was from. So, for example, our current president is from New York City. Our last president was from Hawaii. That's not the capital of this. That's not what this country is called. This country is called the United States of America. So it's very incorrect to call the natives the Powhatans, when in fact that was only where the current king, when the English got here, that was only his nativity. That was where he was from. That wasn't necessarily the name of the natives, and that's not what the natives call their nation. So I like to get the story right. You know, I hate to be because the narrative that we learn in high school is really all wrong, and our scholars know. Their American scholars know, but for whatever reason they started a false narrative a long time ago, and they choose to keep that narrative going. Forever and ever, amen, even though it's false. Even to the point where you have such a bad false narrative, by the time Disney comes along and want to do a film on a person that they thought's name was Pocahontas, when her name was in fact Matoaka. That was her royal name. That was the name that you would call her because she was a royal, Now, the name that her family called her was Amanuet. And that was her familiar name amongst her friends and family. However, that was not necessarily her royal name. And and then of course she had another name once she got abducted, because this painting is called the Abduction of Matoaka. Once she got, and when I say abducted, I mean kidnapped, taken against her will. Okay, let's just go ahead and say that's what happened. She was taken against her will. She was kidnapped. Taliban kind of thing, She was just tricked, suckered onto a Captain Argyle's ship, and Captain Argyle offered a native. And what people don't understand is that the things that was manufactured in Europe were things that the Native Americans had never ever seen before, and they thought these things were magical. It's just extraordinary. I mean, some of the things that the colonials had to show the natives, some of the things that they was trading with, and the natives kind of knew that they were getting invaded, sort of, but at the same time, some of the things that they, blankets for the first time, cloth for the first time, some of the things that they were being presented with was just irresistible. And their curiosity was just overwhelming, What they wanted to do was see what other things they could trade. So what did the colonials want? They wanted food, They wanted, they wanted passage. They wanted land, They wanted rights to the property, and to ownership of a state inside of another state which already existed. And of course, that's not how the Powhatan Confederacy worked. The Powhatan Confederacy did not work that way. The way the Powhatan Confederacy worked was that nobody owned land. Nobody. Not one person owned land. And everybody shared everything. So there was no such a thing as ownership. As a matter of fact, if you built a house somewhere, you could literally come later at a later date and move to another location that another tribe had occupied. And that tribe might get up and move to another location. So there was no sense of ownership or anything like that. So When the English came and they requested ownership, it started to make conflict because the natives didn't understand why at one time they could actually access land and go onto the land as they always have, and then all of a sudden the colonials said, no, you can't go on this land no more. This land is owned by, Captain so-and-so or Sir such and such and such, and you're frightening the Englishman, and it's his land now because we gave you some pearls, and we gave you some diamonds, and we gave you some things made out of metal. We gave you things made out of silver, some gold. We gave you these things in trade. I mean, for example, the island of Long Island, when the Dutch came, because not only did the English, several hundred years later now, when the English came, it was 1607. But when the Dutch came to the colonies, it was 17-something. So you're talking almost 100 years later. And when they met the natives there, one of the sub-tribes was called the Manhattans. And of course, they belonged to Confederacy also. And what happened was they take me to your leader, and they just basically gave him a case of ingots and trinkets in exchange for the whole island of Manhattan. They purchased the island of Manhattan. The same thing with William Penn in Pennsylvania. When they landed, again, they just gave them some ingots and trinkets, and they basically got the whole state of Pennsylvania in the bargain, or at least Philadelphia. So it's like, at least the first port anyway, but basically it was a whole entire half a state, let's just say that kind of area, because they were looking to build large plantations. They were not looking to just have just a little city where you got a little fort and about 5 or 6 houses around in a little circle, a little church in the center. No, they were looking to expand. They were looking for ownership. They were looking to have some type of wealth going on through planting. Tobacco was the main crop that John Rolfe got rich off of, and basically, I don't know how many Europeans knew anything about tobacco. And John Rolfe basically discovered tobacco. Now, just like Christopher Columbus discovered America for the Europeans, because the Native Americans already had discovered tobacco. But in terms of sticking with that kind of frame of mind, John Rolfe basically discovered tobacco, introduced it to Europe. Tobacco being very, very addictive when smoked. And I think you could also chew it. The natives were using it several ways. And they taught this to John Rolfe. What John Rolfe did was got him a couple of addicts, He took it to Europe, produced some European tobacco addicts, and the rest is history. You have companies like Philip Morris, who's basically one of the biggest drug dealers on planet Earth, legal drug dealers, I should say, on planet Earth. Nicotine is an addictive substance. It is definitely a drug. Smoke, just like marijuana would be smoked, or any other type of substance of this nature. So, John Rolfe was the first drug dealer documented on planet Earth. He's the first, And he took the drugs back to Europe and basically made a bunch of Europeans tobacco addicts and got very, very wealthy off of this. Of course, he didn't find the gold like Cortez found. But Cortez eventually had to kill Montezuma. Yes, he did. He had to kill Montezuma because Montezuma was the king. Montezuma owned the whole area. He had plenty of people. And all Cortez did was proceed to mow down all the natives. Just get rid of them. Just wipe them up. Just get rid of them. They're in front of my prophets. And we want to set up a European way of dealing with the resources. We don't want to have the native way. Of course, what Cortez had was gold. A lot of it. Not a little bit of it. Tons of it. Same thing with the Mayans and the Aztecs. They had gold. And they were working in metal. Now, their military was not so much mechanized in terms of breastplates and armor and things like that. But they basically used metal for ornamentation, for ceremony. They would use gold for things like that. And so, but the Tsenacommacah natives did not use metals. They had no such tradition of metallurgy, you know. They basically used bone and stone to make most of their tools and weapons with, and wood. That's what they used to make their weapons with. So there wasn't a whole lot of precious metals that John Rolfe thought he would be getting, you know, going into this area. Of course, what they were attracted to was the thing that made Cortez wealthy. They were attracted to the potential to find gold and just, you know, of course, gold was money at the time. I think gold still is money, but gold was money. So it's almost like there was money growing on trees in the Americas. And so this attracted a whole lot of very greedy, and I'm going to say immoral type people, because they didn't have any regard for life, human life that already existed in the areas that they were invading. No regard whatsoever. You can see the atrocities that Cortez did, feeding people to dogs, burning people at the stake alive, Native Americans. I mean, so this stuff was already going on, you know, putting Jamestown in context. This is well-documented stuff. And the London company which financed Jamestown had to have known this. And at the time, the English royalty that sanctioned the London company to come over here in the first place, they had to also have known what has happened already, because this stuff has been going on since the 1500s. And of course, since the early 1500s, and actually the late 1400s. So you're talking over 100 years of exploitation was going on at the hands of the Spanish and the Portuguese to the natives. Now it's the English time to try their way to exploit. They were already in Jamaica exploiting that. I believe they took Jamaica from the Spanish. They just basically showed up with superior native, bombarded the place, a surrender flag went up, and then that Jamaica became British. But before that, Jamaica was owned by the natives. And then what happened, the natives were actually peacefully trading with the actual Moors of Spain. The Moors of Spain was the first people who was traveling using the sextant over the oceans, just like they traveled over the desert using the sextant. There's no geographical places that you can use for reference for navigation. And so the European was used to navigating around the Mediterranean, where there was plenty of shoreline places. They're navigating along the shore. So there was plenty of landmarks to let them know where they were, you know. The Mediterranean is big, but it's not that incredibly big. So if you just steered in a certain direction a little bit, east to west, north to south, you eventually get to some type of landmark and you know kind of where you are. Or you could just follow the coastline around and navigate, trade, and do your stuff with various other groups. So you have the English, you have the Spanish, and you have the Portuguese, who are your number one maritime European traders. Now, what they did was they used their ships to get around from place to place. And mostly what they were doing before exploring in the New World and basically taking over the New World, they were basically exploiting each other. They were going into each other's turf fighting wars, the Spanish against this one and this one against that one, the Dutch, against the other one, etc., etc. The Norsemen against the English against the Norse, all this kind of stuff, back and forth. But now these civilizations in Europe have become solidified and organized underneath very strong monarchs. And now it was time for the European to kind of branch out with its superior military forces. It's superior society. I mean, let's face it, they had, in terms of technologies, they had a superior society. Now, in terms of war machine, they had a superior society. But in terms of the way they behaved towards their fellow human beings, they had a very inferior society. Now, I don't even know the way they referred to dealt with each other was so great. There was a whole lot of drama that went down there in terms of which king. You had the English, the Joan of Arc thing against the French. I mean, this stuff has been always going on. You had the French against the Italians. You had a lot of little things like that was always going on. One king assert himself above all the others. And of course, now you're in the new world, and here's a person who's a king. They weren't supposed to be very, very friendly. They weren't supposed to be nice and wonderful and sharing. They're supposed to be ruthless, like the kings of Europe. But here these people were, they had a sense of humanity. So they were basically ducks in the water. They were basically just, how do you say it, sitting ducks. They culturally, they were just so naive. They so underestimated the new people that was coming to their country because they couldn't understand them. They couldn't understand purchase. They couldn't understand ownership. That it just was bound to be major culture shock going down. It's just, okay, you have two groups that definitely are not going to understand each other. And the weakest group is going to be the one that suffers the most. And it just so happened that in terms of war machine, when I say weakest, I'm talking about in terms of being able to defend itself militarily. I mean, you had one group of people that was using spears, fashioned with stones, and bow and arrows fashioned with stones, and knives fashioned with stones. Another group of people with steel, and gunpowder, and cannonballs, and all kinds of things like this. So it was a very lopsided conflict. And so a lot of times we, in our history in America, it makes us feel good to think that the Native Americans died of disease. I don't think so. I think the Native Americans died of just simply cannonballs and gunshot. And I always give this analogy because we had all these buffalo and animals that weren't in Europe, but they were here. And they disappeared at the same time the Native Americans started disappearing. And they never came back. They never made a resurgence. That's because all of a sudden, instead of having bow and arrows for food, you had a lot of people coming here looking for food. You had a lot of free bison just running all around all over the place. And of course, it's just easy to just shoot these things down. One bullet, one musket, fire, and you basically had food for everybody for a little bit of time. So it didn't take that long before the buffalo depleted. Their population was just as many as the people. So each tribe of Powhatan's Federation had about 15,000 people in it, according to some archaeologists. And I happen to agree with those estimates. So that's why I quote certain archaeologists. Some have it less because what they're doing is they're referring to the notes of Captain John Smith and Keys and various other mercenaries that was basically counting warriors. They weren't counting the actual people making the pots and pans and farming. They were, and the women and the children and the babies. They were counting They were counting the people who could fight, a fighting age. So if you go and you just, say, okay, I don't trust it unless it's an English document. I don't trust anybody else's stuff because the English people were the only ones writing at the time. So what the natives had was they had folklore. They passed things down by word of mouth. So we're not going to go with what the natives said their populations were because that's passed down by word of mouth. We're going to go by what the English wrote. Of course, the English perspective is very biased because, their whole perspective was to come in and take over the land. Their perspective was not to actually give an account of the cultures that they encountered. Their perspective was to figure out how to subdue those cultures. Their perspective was, okay, now when we have to go, eventually we're going to have to go fight these guys. Now that we understand them, who are the people we got to fight? Who are the people that we don't have to really worry about too much because they're just regular old civilians. They're just women that's cooking and farming. Because basically the Tsenacommacahs, the women were the farmers. The men were the hunters and the soldiers, and the men were the farmers. So, this tended to repeat itself all over the country. This particular scenario where the natives didn't understand. They didn't understand purchase. The way that they traded amongst themselves was different. Basically, if you, for example, if you was an arrowhead maker, you would trade for food because you're busy making really, really nice arrowheads, and you really don't have time to gallivant in the woods looking for food for animals, because it took a certain amount of skill to make arrowheads. At the same time, the hunter didn't want to waste all of his time making arrowheads. So what he did was, there was a little guy who would just stay at the camp, and all this guy would do was just make some really, really good arrowheads. So what he would do is he'll cut off a little piece of meat for the guy and get his new supply of arrowheads. He would just trade. Every time they would go out on a hunting mission, he would come back and say, okay, these arrowheads work really nice. I mean, they penetrated the bison really nice, and you're the best, so I'm going to get my arrowheads from you. Here's your meat. So that's how that's how this guy set up a business making arrowheads. He just was very, very good at making them because his arrows or arrowheads did not chip up. They could be reappropriated, used again. Now he might not have been the one that attached the arrowheads necessarily to the wooden shaft and fashioned the feathers. Now he could have also been the one doing that. But depending on who was the craftsperson, what village, and what their tendencies were. But I'm just trying to describe how the Native American went about trading with each other prior to the time that the Europeans showed up, And so it was an even trade, a certain piece of meat for a certain number of arrowheads, or a piece of pottery because you needed to cook this meat once you brought it back. And so you would trade a piece of meat for a certain kind of cooking pot. And the pots will be made out of stone that's scooped out. And of course, when you're traveling, you're not just traveling on foot. You're using something called a canoe. Of course, it's a Tsenacommacah word. Canoe is a Tsenacommacah word. So it is a word that basically comes from their language. The first time we hear the word canoe is coming from the Tsenacommacah Powhatans. And so we have a lot of words because of the fact that it's hundreds of years of this particular tribe is interfacing with the very first English. And you have to remember the English at that time was speaking Elizabethan English, which is a different English that we speak today. So as our language was evolving, the language that we speak in America, as it was evolving, these words were being added to the language. So as English is evolving in the Western Hemisphere, Native American phrases and words like canoe, tomahawk, pecan, The list goes on. It's just tons of words that the Native Americans used began to be incorporated into English. And today we don't even think anything about saying pecan, tomahawk, canoe. Those are all the Tsenacommacah words from their language that is now part of English. So we do have remnants of the culture still today. There's remnants of the culture that prevails in our language. So there was a merging of two cultures, for sure. And it's not just one culture that had everything. Because the reason some of these words became like normalized is because it was the best way to transport. The best way that you could travel in the original colonies times was by canoe. There were no roads. There were buffalo trails, but the natives knew those. But the natives themselves didn't always use buffalo trails because they weren't always going where the native wanted to go. So what did the native use? He used the waterways, the streams, the rivers, the creeks. And so this became the best, fastest way to get from point A to point B. And then what they would do is, now you could be a canoe maker. And so of course, you would trade X number of amount of food for X amount of canoe. Because then you're going out on a hunt. Some of it you might be traveling by boat. Some of it you might get off and go by foot. Then you'll go back to your canoe, etc. So the natives had that kind of trade going on. They had that kind of system in place. But their system was different because it was basically this object gets you this, so we can get this objective done. That's kind of how the importance, that's the kind of importance because, basically what economy is value. It's not so much the piece of paper that we call an American dollar. It's not that that's valuable. It's just a piece of paper. It's only worth a penny, or less, whatever it costs to print it. And it's not even a real pretty print, so it's not something that you would collect and necessarily put on your wall for its outstanding beauty. It's just that we honor that as trade. Therefore, if you have a lot of these little paper bills, prints, with numbers on it, you can trade for that value of real items. You call certain properties real estate, but really anything that's real is real estate. When you have a real estate sale, you're selling stuff inside the house, not just the house. So real estate is the real things. And it's the estate. It's whatever that person collected in their lifetime. So the Native American kind of had this kind of outlook. They had an outlook like, this doesn't really belong to anybody, but we do have a person who makes these. I need to possess these arrowheads. We have a guy who makes them. I'm going to trade this meat that I have to get some more of his really cool arrowheads that I need to hunt with and fight with and whatever. This person makes a really superior club tomahawk, or maybe the native could make some of this stuff himself, But people tend to have a little specialty. And in having these specialties, they had a little craft. So they would stay back, and not hunt. And they would stay back and essentially make these crafts. So you had these people in the village. You didn't always have just everybody's a warrior, everybody's a hunter. It was not that kind of society. So when you find people like Captain John Smith counting people, he was only really counting the hunters. A hunter and a warrior was simply the same person. It was a person who was very good with the bow, a person very good with the arrow. It also was a person who was very good with the spear and the tomahawk. Basically, he was very good at killing things. So this was not every skill. So you had natives that could go generation after generation and had no warrior skills whatsoever, but they were really, really good at making pots. They're really, really good at pottery. Matter of fact, this might have been a skill that their family specialized in. Father would teach it to the son and daughters or whatever. And that family was known for their pots. Making really, really good cooking pots and whatnot. And even ornamentation pots. And then you had a person who was making jewelry, the beads, you know. When Captain John Smith saw Powhatan Tsenacommacah for the first time, he was at awe. He was surprised at how reverent this person was, how noble he was in his outlook. And he said if it wasn't for the fact that he was staring at a naked savage, this is his words, a naked savage, he would have thought that he was talking to some of the royals of Europe. So just to get an idea of what the natives were actually like, Captain John Smith's own words, even though they were very biased words, even though they were very negative because they called him a savage, and he was negative. But you know, I'm in Virginia right now, which is basically the land of the Tsenacommacahs. I mean, it belonged to them first. I'm right here in the area called Henrico, one of the first colonies and cities set up by the colonials. I mean, it wasn't the first because Jamestown, places like that, Elizabeth City clearly was the first. And then places like Norfolk. But Henrico, as of 16-something, was on the map. You know, it's one of the oldest places in this country in terms of an actual place with a history and a governor and et cetera and et cetera. I mean, in terms of the English system. So, what you have is, the temperatures is about 94 degrees Fahrenheit today. Fairly warm. I mean, if I wasn't going live right now, I'd be painting with no shirt on. I wouldn't even have a shirt on. Even though I do have the air conditioning going, it's still, my air conditioner can't deal sometimes when it gets around 95. It's an older air conditioner. It really don't like to deal with that. Struggles. You know, it turns outdoor 95. By the time you get to, and it's today, I do these lives. I'm on Eastern Standard Time, so I start these lives around 4 o'clock. And sometimes I just can't get myself going to about 4:30. So around 4:30, when I started this live, I mean, it's already 95 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And so it takes, the day doesn't start out that way. You know, the day starts out around 72, you know, maybe 69. And then you get around 11 o'clock, it's about 80. And then you get about 2 o'clock, it's in the 90s, of course. When you get about now, it's 95. So it's getting hot. And so you, the tendency, even for modern people, and we, of course, I'm talking originally about the Tsenacommacah, but even for modern people, the tendency is to take off your clothes in the summertime, because I mean it gets hot in Virginia nowadays. I don't know, maybe because I'm a little older. I don't remember this when I was young. When I was a wee lad, it seemed like it was a little bit easier. The weather was just a little bit more, I could stay out in it. And I'd play in it, ride my bicycle all around, play sports, whatever. Didn't seem to run into any real big issues. But it seems like now, it's like, whoa, man, I don't want to stay out here long at all. Okay, so what I said I was going to do is try to, let me sit back a little bit and meditate on this, because I was doing that yesterday. Oh, somebody wrote a lot of stuff. So what I do is when you make comments in my room, I like to read them to the room. Okay? Rennie Wilson, hey, the filmmaker, fellow cinematographer, how you doing? Fellow filmmaker. Stephen, please stop tagging me Okay, I will stop tagging you. I didn't even realize I was tagging you, Rennie. I didn't even, I just go down the list. But what I will have to do is somehow take you off the list, which I have to figure that out. I don't know how to do that. But, I mean, you can always just tag it in, undo, or do whatever. I don't know. But if there's that much of a problem, I will rectify that. Okay, so now I'm going back to my conversation. I thought I was going to have some interesting comments to respond to. That one wasn't so interesting. Okay, so anyway, there was conflict amongst the Native American and the colonials, and it was a lot of misunderstandings. But I think really the real misunderstanding was the Native Americans had no idea what was in store for them. They had no concept of the fact that they were actually being invaded. I don't think they really knew. I think they just, they were very, very, they were very, very, they were very, very, how do you say it? They were very fascinated with the things that the colonial people had. They were fascinated with the novelty of these people that was coming in. Things, there were so many things that they had never seen before. They just had never seen them before. And it was fascinating to them. And I'm going to say, I like to say curiosity kills the cat. And I really do believe so. In that case, I believe that curiosity did kill the cat. And in their case, it was just a little bit too much. It was too much advanced civilization for them, and they just could not overcome it. So, anyway, there's just not enough images. There's not enough images about the actual Tsenacommacah from the Native American point of view. So I took it upon myself as an artist to begin to make images from the Native American point of view. And also, not only just to make the images from the Native American point of view, but also to just make paintings. There is a painting, for example, of the Native Americans of Pennsylvania. Natives that was encountered. They had a different emperor of them. And what was the painting that was made was commissioned by the English, by William Penn, was a painting that showed William Penn negotiating with the king there to get land. Basically, it's several boxes of treasure chest, boxes of treasure, and they're taking it off the ship, and they're offering this to this particular person that they've never met before. They don't even speak the language, in exchange for Philadelphia. In exchange for Pennsylvania. Literally, the English made that painting after the fact, of course, but very close to the date. It was definitely I think that painting was in the 1700s. And basically, what Pennsylvania was started in the early 1700s, and that painting was somewhat, almost, just a little bit later. But the Native Americans clearly, we can look at it now and clearly see, these people really had no idea of how to negotiate properly with William Penn for the land that William Penn was trying to negotiate with. And this negotiation happened immediately. Upon leaving the ship, this negotiation was happening immediately. And so there was no real way for how can it be a real, how can it be genuine that William Penn was really looking for a financial exchange for Pennsylvania, where the first thing he do as soon as he gets off the ship is say, here's a big sack, here's a big chest of gold. Okay, now give me this area. It's just not even like, it's not even something that you could really realistically think that even William Penn thought was a real negotiation. It was a real contract. Basically, William Penn had already asked in England. He asked the English government, "Can I come over here and take some land and start a colony?" Take some English people and place them in what they considered to be the New World, in the Americas, for England and myself, of course. And of course, what the English king said was, "Sure you can. What do I get out of it?" And then, of course, with just like with John Rolfe did hundreds of years earlier, he said, "Okay, king, you're going to get a lot of profits off of this tobacco. That's what you're going to get. Whatever we..." And of course, the Dutch had already started a little something similar around the same time, and people already trading for pelts, for furs. And the whole idea of this trade was to make the people from Europe wealthy. At the same time, what did the Native Americans get out of it? I mean, they did get something out of it. What they got out of it was, what the Native Americans got out of it was cotton. They had never had seen and used cotton before. And all of a sudden now they can dress with various dyed cottons, dyed and undyed, just various linens and fabrics that they had never seen before. And these fabrics kept them warm, and they most likely marveled over these things, how nice they were. And I could see certain people saying, "Hold on, these new people have come into our land. They're taking areas that some of them are somewhat hostile to our people. King, they're killing some of our people over there. What should we do?" The king said, "Well, look at all these carpets I have, and look at all these blankets, and look at all these shirts and drapes and all these wonderful things that our people can make out of this fabric that they're giving us. Look at all these little shiny pieces of silver and gold that they give me. Look, I even have a special tomahawk now made out of metal. Much stronger. I mean, I could forge down trees much easier with these. Look, like, just take it right out. Take this thing on out there and look at it for yourself. Look at that. I could just really just go on this tree and cut myself out a log and start hollowing me out a canoe very, very easily with these new tools. It's making life better for the natives. For us to have some of these really wonderful axe tools, shovels, and various tools for farming that the English had that the native didn't really have. Now, of course, the native had stone versions, their own versions of tools like this. A lot of these tools tend to be similar, but by having these tools available in metal, really gave certain tribes an advantage, because what they would do is what the English showed up, they would quickly go out to find the tribes that was your enemy tribes or competition. Okay, I know that you're the king of this tribe, but who's the king of your other tribes in the area? Can I make some alliances with your enemies? Because if I do, I can trade with them. Then I can use that as a negotiation tool, Instead of you getting these wonderful tools, the other guy's going to get them. And he's going to give me some land. So what happened was the English were very good at using that type of negotiation with the colonials. They were very, very good at that. So, and so that's what happened. So one native group said, okay, well, that king over there didn't take the cheese, They offered him something and they turned it down. They said too many of their people was getting killed and they just didn't want to deal anymore. They got enough little ingots and trinkets, that's enough. So they would simply say, okay, you give us supplies with the furs that we need. You supply us with the timber and things like that we want. And and meat, of course, things like that. And some of the native crops, you supply us with that. And we'll give you these wonderful little ingots and trinkets. So this is something that a king would have to think about, because on the one hand, he knew that this could be very harmful to his people, because these people could be violent toward his people. But on the other hand, this person was very smart, because on the one hand, this person was going to talk to his enemies. And then not only would he have his enemies to contend with, he would also not have an ally with the English. So what happened was very quickly the English found themselves the middleman between two tribes that didn't necessarily get along. And what the English did was just simply play one tribal leader against the other one. And, they were good at it. They were doing it for a long time in Europe amongst themselves. And they were just very, very good at it. Now, the natives knew how to do the same thing. But since they shared a similar culture, they kind of knew the same tricks. The difference was the natives didn't have much else. Technologically, they were kind of the same. They didn't have much to offer each other in terms of trade. I mean, they had the same war tools, very similar war tools, very similar hunting and farming tools, very similar fishing tools, very similar housing tools. They really didn't have a lot to offer each other. The one that seemed to have everything to offer them was the English. So it became very easy for the English to convince them, you know what, your culture is kind of like old-fashioned. Your culture is not the best. It's pagan. It's not advanced. You could be like us, What you need to do is accept this religion, start speaking English, so we can work with you better. And what we're going to do is, and that was a reward. If you could speak English, as opposed to your original language, there was a huge reward in trade for you. There was a huge advantage. You start getting rifles even, and swords, and axes, things like that. You can get a lot of resources that others in your area couldn't get. Of course, over time, you would see some tribes start to move to the fore. They were minor tribes, and then all of a sudden, because the English showed up, they started getting advanced tools. They started to really have a lot more leisure time. They started to have more time to build, more time to develop their warfare, more time to make more bows and arrows and things like that, more time they were hunting more for sport, not necessarily for food, because they're trading also because the English was doing wholesale farming, large scale farming where they would just get one big field. The natives would have multiple things in their farms. And the farming was done mostly by the women, but it was basically the farms were set up on a per family basis, on a per community basis. It wasn't really like a farm set up where this one farmer is going to take things to the market and is going to trade these things with everybody else for whatever, These were new concepts, completely brand new concepts to the Native American, you know. And so the Native American found himself grappling with these things for the very first time. He found himself saying, okay, well, I need to learn how to do this trade thing with these guys, you know, because my cousin tribe over there and then some of my enemy tribes, they're doing pretty good with that. I mean, they're making strides by leaps and bounds here. And I seem to be still in the same spot that I was in, you know, 2-3 years ago. And these guys seem to be just going from goodness to goodness, you know. And so there was some periods where the tribes were kind of isolated from the English to some level, so they could take some of these gifts back, and really for a while thrive pretty good until the English expanded and moved into their area. And then when that happened, of course, what the natives said, hold on, man, you're going too far. We like trading with you. We like doing that. We like all the little wonderful things you guys make. But this land is our historic land, and we didn't really we didn't tell you could have this. And then the English say, oh, yes, you did. You took these pots and pans from us back in, and I have this piece of paper. Can you understand English now? Because hopefully we did teach you English. And see, you put your mark right there. That means you agreed to this, because we talked about this. And then, of course, the Native Americans said, but no, I didn't really understand it that way then. I understand more now than I did then. Of course, what the Englishmen would say was, okay, well, too late. Deal is done. We already invested. You know, we have our people going in. We have people coming from England who's purchased some of this territory, and they want to start farming it. And we can't renege on that. We can't change our obligation just like that. So therefore, I'm sorry, but ain't nothing I can do. This is ours. We're not giving it back. And of course, what the Native Americans say, no, you're going to give it back because it was ours first. All of this is ours, by the way. And of course, what the English say, no, it's not. This right here is ours because we negotiated this. And of course, what that started was another war with a different tribe, with a different nation, you know, confederation. So you had the Pennsylvania natives and the Delaware natives, and basically what they were doing was they would go to war. So you were at war with the Virginia natives, or what was left of them, because you went into Virginia a lot sooner than you went into Pennsylvania. And so you were still subduing the Virginia natives, and you were sharing this information amongst the English. Okay, this is what we did down in Virginia, and this worked. So this is what you need to do up in Pennsylvania. The English was going back and sharing this information with each other. And it was working very effectively on the East Coast natives. This included the people that was in the place we call Manhattan and the place that we call Pennsylvania. This was just the way to go. They had gotten very, very good at it. And they weren't gonna change. They weren't gonna change this behavior because it was very successful. So the early on negotiations with the Native Americans generally was a disaster for the Native Americans. This was a disaster. It was never going to be, was not going to be good for them. It just was a, it just was not, the quick result was they got new stuff that they had never seen before. In that sense, that was good. And also they got education about different ways to work the land, that they could upgrade their previous way of working. Also, there was new foods that the English brought. So there was some exchange. The natives had their native foods, but the English brought some foods to the area as well. And this was beneficial to the natives. It would help their diet. They liked that. So there was some positive give and take going on. It wasn't just all just guns and war. It was there was positivity as well. However, Most of the time, the positive parts of things were short-lived, and what tended to prevail was the negative in terms of the wars, because when you kill somebody out of somebody's family, it takes a while before you can, people remember, our uncle so-and-so got killed by the people who live over there, and I got no restitution, basically nobody cared. Nobody did anything about it. They just kind of let it go. And so this would create small tribes, small factions, not necessarily on the East Coast, and wasn't necessarily large-scale wars at first. It started out with small-scale tribal, wars, basically amongst the local colony and whatever group of people that found themselves, close to wherever they settled. That was bad luck for the people who, for certain natives, if you just happen to be in an area that the English decided to colonize. It just was not it was not going to go easy for you, because your life was going to be forever changed. You had to learn a new way to do everything, a new way to negotiate, a new way to do everything. You was going to have to learn that. There was just no way around that. And so, depending on how you adapted and how you learned, it really had a lot to do with your survival abilities. Whether you were going to be somebody that's going into the future, or whether you were going to be someone who was going to die off and become a has-been and be forgotten. So, as we know, what happened to a lot of native tribes where they became a has-been and was forgotten. So what I like to do is, for those tribes, I like to be the one who basically don't forget them. And I like to be the one to actually commemorate their leaders and their struggle in my paintings. So you could consider me a kind of like a vigilante painter, so to speak. Not so much a vigilante painter, but a painter who likes to see the side of the underdog, see the side of the person whose story didn't get told right. That's important. And some more people are waving, so that's very good. So let's see. Christopher Jones, how you doing? David, how's it going? Good to see you guys. Glad you can come to my studio. So this is Jamestown, and this is the attack of Jamestown by Tsenacommacah, Chief Powhatan, and his brother, Tsenacommacah. Of course, Chief Powhatan's name was really Tsenacommacah. His title was really Matoaka. So it wasn't chief, it was Matoaka. Okay, so just to give you some background of this, what happened was when Captain John Smith first met Matoaka, this person they call Pocahontas. Of course, Poca means little girl in Latin, and Hontas means wanton woman, or B-I-C-T-H, or whore in Greek. So her name was never Pocahontas. That's a diss name. Why would you call your daughter a little whore? You wouldn't. And if you was a Native American, not exposed to any European languages, how would you know Greek? Which most Europeans didn't even know Greek. You had to be highly educated. So John Rolfe named her that. Or either one of the very educated English aristocracy. And back then, if you was educated, you learned Greek. I mean, today, if you go to college, you don't have to learn Greek. Greek is not necessary. But back then, a sign of an educated person was They know Greek. For that reason, you see a lot of medicines and a lot of astrology and the the certain sciences. They're named in Greek or Latin. And because at one point in time, only aristocracy or only certain privileged people could get an education. And of course, they will want to remember the oldest European cultures and societies because, we like to think that what culture does is it gets more advanced as time go on. But in reality, cultures go up and down, they meander. They get advanced and then they go backwards and they go forward, then they go backwards. I can say now that America, for example, is a culture right now that's going backwards. We're not going forward, we're going backwards. We were going forward, then we stopped, and then other people start catching up to us. And now we're basically going backwards. But we think we're going forward like we were. And so a lot of cultures, they don't realize, you guys are losing it, You're not really doing what you used to do, But, of course, you're the mighty Roman Empire, Yes, we are. But we know that they failed. Same with the Greeks before them. Same with the Egyptians before them. Same with the Persians and all those folks, You can go on and on, You can go to the Sumerians. You can go to any culture you want. They rise. And then they fall. Some rise very quickly and leave the historic timeline as fast as they came. Some come and stay a very long time, like the Egyptians. But what they all do eventually is fall. Now, some can be resurrected. You could say America is a resurrection of the old Roman Empire. Perhaps you can say that. The Roman Empire did at some point start including other ethnicities into their group. But the Roman Empire started out as Etruscans, or they started out as a colony of the Greeks anyway, which basically that would hint to the fact that you have multi-ethnicity starting out the Roman Empire as various groups are coming together to form one place. Now, what I'm doing now is I want to sit back and look at this painting a bit, even though I'm kind of somewhat early on into my painting session. At this stage of the game, I don't like to just constantly be painting because when I'm blocking things out, there's plenty for me to put paint down and look at. But what I'm trying to look at is how can I isolate my images and what needs to be isolated and brought out. And I think my two Native American, Opak Chanakano and Powhatan Tsenacommacah, they're really coming out really nice. I really like the way they're developing. But the three in the middle, Matoaka, John Roth, and John Smith, they're to me right now. I'm switching it from history, basically talking about the way I'm painting. Now I'm going to a painting session now, discussion about how I'm going about my painting. I really do need to separate them from the background more. I need to make them come forward, pop out, and because they're really not in the foreground. What's in the foreground is Opak Chanakana. Actually, to tell you the truth, what's really in the foreground is this guy that's already dead over here on the ground, which I may just go in and just, I think I want his paint to dry because I think I'm going to paint something even over top that. So I think I'm going to deal with him right now real quick because I can. Because basically I kind of just scumbled him in real quick. I mean, I didn't take that long at all. And for the people who have been kind of following me from the beginning, it didn't take that long at all for me to kind of get this guy in there. And what I'm going to do is just kind of put him in just a little bit better. I'm going to get his, because a lot of, when I first put this in, I'm painting kind of oil, wet on wet. And I really didn't put the, I didn't really try to be exact with this at all. I just really tried to get this image going, get this image on where it needs to be on the canvas, So So that's basically what I have now. I have this image where it needs to be on the canvas, you know. And next what I'm going to do is, and a lot of times when you're doing that, you don't all the time have all of the little pieces you need in terms of the face. Now this face is not meant to draw a lot of attention. It really isn't, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just try to 3D-ize his face just a little bit more. You know, instead of it looking so profile-y on the canvas, I'm just going to try to just get it to look a little bit more three-dimensional, so to speak. And of course, I'm going to obscure this even further at a later date on the canvas because I don't want things to be so obvious as this, but I do want it to be kind of, I want it to be well painted. I want it to be just like this rough paint underneath another set of paint. So these are bottom layers of paint here. And of course, what I'm going to do with this part that I'm working on now, I'm going to just have it to set up some and kind of dry, and then I'm going to go over top of it with some other painting, get other things going. But obviously this guy is already bitted here. He's already dead. He's been shot with arrows. He's been taken out by the natives already. And I have him as foreground. So as I was talking about foreground, I was saying, okay, I got my foreground going. So I'm in with like a filbert brush. I have a bristled filbert brush. I want to go get another one. I think I might want 3 such brushes. Number 2s and number 4s. I like filberts because I can do straight lines with it. I can just do a lot of things with one brush really easily with the same brush. So I like painting with filberts a lot, especially when I'm doing blocking stuff because I'm pushing around the paint quite a bit. I really like to use, and especially when I'm working with heavy body paints, I like to use the filbert. So basically what I have is some gray here. So now I already went in with the highlights first. So now I'm going to go in with these darker tones and put in some of these darker tones in the cheek and the eye sockets of this fella that's already kind of been shot with arrows here. And he's already deceased and on the ground. And you can see the arrows in his chest there. But and I'm not going to have him looking so obvious, but at the same time, I do want to get him in there. I want to get this more paint. I don't want it to be so gestural. I want it to be just a little bit. This is not going to be the final coat. This is not going to be the final layer. However, there's going to be layers that go on top of this. But I still like to paint my under layers. You know, I like to paint those. I don't want those under layers to be I don't like, in this case, since I'm kind of building this painting doesn't exist. None of these images exist anywhere except for was in my head. Now, did I use reference materials to get ideas from these? Yes. But a lot of these were drawings at first. So, and what I have a tendency to do when I'm designing a new concept like this, especially if it's telling a story, and it's of imagery that does not exist, what I have a tendency to do is paint. I want to paint the guy first. Then after I paint the guy, I'm going to build him into the environment. So, but I want to get the guy's face right. I want to get the lighting on him right. So I could just say, okay, I'm going to have him obscured by some grass, and I'm going to have this, and I could just have a picture that I made, and then I only paint around, and then that kind of gets into painting by numbers, and I don't want to do that. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look as natural. The whole painting doesn't harmonize as one. Sometimes it takes away from the story because it doesn't look as believable. You know, in terms of this, does this image go with that, or is this just inserted in, or, you know, you kind of getting like a Photoshop kind of mentality, you know, or, you know, a paint by numbers kind of looking painting, and I don't want that. I want a painting that actually looks like, you know, a painting. I want all the elements to work together in harmony. And in order to do that, I find it's better to just to build the elements. In other words, if there's a guy who got shot with arrows, what I'm going to do is just simply paint a guy first, lay it on the ground. And if he fell in a patch of grass, then later I'm going to paint the patch of grass that he fell in that's in the foreground in front of him on top of that. And to me, what I get out of that is I wind up getting a better end result when I do that, because the image turns out looking more believable, and oftentimes there's some discovery that you get into when you go to build it that way, and also you build in some impasto.